You know what I love most about virtual reality? It's that reality can be whatever I want it to be. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and today we are taking a second look at my brand new living room VR PC. I built this system about a week ago as part of my Fractal Design Era ITX review, and if you want to see the build log and full review of that case, you can click right up there. Now, spoiler alert, things didn't quite go as planned, mainly because of component selection on my part. Once I got a properly fitting power supply installed, the rest of the build went quite smoothly, and I've been very happy with the system overall. It's not quite as quiet as I would have liked it to be, though. You can hear it idling from across a quiet room, and at gaming it's actually bordering on a little bit too loud. But overall, the performance has been stellar on this system, and you just need to turn your volume up a couple more clicks. Just as a reminder, this is running an MSI B450i gaming AC motherboard with a Ryzen 7 3700X 8-core 16-thread processor. There are two 8GB sticks of Patriot Viper SteelSeries memory running at 3766 MHz at cast latency 15, and that has been a stellar combination for this CPU. I might have gone just a little bit overkill in a couple of places, like with the 1TB Patriot Viper VP4100 PCI Express 4.0 NVMe drive that does 5000 MB/s read and write on a B450 ITX board. Yeah, I was as shocked as you are that it actually ran at PCIe 4.0 speeds, and with the Deepcool Castle 240EX 240mm liquid all-in-one cooler. I probably should have just gone with a Wraith Spire and saved a little bit of money there, but I will say it looks pretty baller inside this case. And last but not least, occupying literally every last square inch available for a graphics card inside of the Era ITX, it's the Zotac Gaming 2070 Super. And as you'll find out, that turned out to be a pretty darn good choice. But today is not about the build log or the parts. That's what the last video was for. Today is about benchmarking my brand new living room VR PC. So I will let my much better looking counterpart take it from here. Welcome upstairs to my living room. Plan for right now is we are just going to fire up some VR games and play through them. Later on, I am going to run some benchmarks, and then we'll talk about the experience as a whole and those benchmark numbers when we get back down to the studio. But for right now, let's go and play some Half Life Alyx. All right, so I have been playing for probably about 40 minutes now, and so far I have to say this is probably the best VR experience I have ever had. Now, my best VR experience to date was actually Half Life 2, because it is the only game I've ever felt genuinely a little uneasy while playing. It's the only game that I've ever felt a true sense of presence in a game for an extended period of time. You get feelings of presence from like Super Hot and you know, Fallout 4 and Boneworks and even Duck Hunt or Duck Season. I got like, I'm fully immersed in the game. This is to another scale and another degree entirely, because everything that I do in the game feels 100% natural and looks like I wanted VR to look for the last 6 years. And I know I'm supposed to be focusing on the benchmark of the computer right now, but honestly, I just can't get over how good this game is right now. I mean, look, I can poke at individual pieces of glass with my gun. How cool is that? Ooh, there's a floppy disk. There we go. Good as new. Very similar to the first computer I played Half-Life on, in fact. Anyway, like I said, the level of detail in this game is simply stunning. Getting into the performance so far, the performance is absolutely unreal. I'm going to have to look at the benchmark numbers. I think this is locked at 90 FPS solid. There's no jitter, there's no stuttering, there's no reprojection going on. It is everything that I want in a VR computer right now. The lighting is incredible. The gravity gloves are, I was a little bit skeptical at seeing if they would work well inside of this game. They are absolutely fantastic and feel so natural. But what I'm really impressed with is the movement. You can move pretty much however you want. I am, whoa. Might want to stop here for a second. Okay, that's creepy. But anyway, I was saying the locomotion in this game is fantastic. It is so incredibly fluid. Now, I'd say a veteran VR player at this point, because I've played a number of different games with a number of different locomotions. This is one of the smoothest walking experiences I've had. It's not making me ill at all. And I'm even just using the Windows Mixed Reality headset. Now, there is a vignette around my vision because it's not as wide of a field of view as the Vive, or definitely not as the Pimax. But jump down here. Okay. But I have had absolutely no feelings of being ill in this game, and even games that I've been comfortable with, like Fallout 4 with a normal locomotion, that game tends to make me a little nauseous after an hour. This is nothing like that. Taking a look at those benchmark numbers, and there's really only one way to call this one, and that is an absolute success at a living room VR PC. All but one of the games that I benchmarked managed 90 FPS on average, which is where my Samsung Odyssey headset maxes out. One of the cool things about that spec is the Samsung Odyssey is actually one of the higher resolution headsets on the market. In fact, it's tied with the Valve Index with dual 1440 by 1600 panels, which is why I chose the Odyssey for my benchmark testing. In fact, the only headsets you can get right now with a higher resolution are the offerings from Pimax in their 5K and 8K units respectively, which let me know down in the comments below if you'd like me to take a look at one of those. I'd be more than happy to run them through their paces. But back to the gaming benchmarks really quick. 4 of the 8 titles that I tested had a 0.1% low of at least 70 FPS or higher, which is pretty much flawless performance inside of VR. Arizona Sunshine and Gorn both had dips down into the mid-50s, but interestingly enough, Gorn was the only title out of everything that I tried that I noticed any amount of significant stuttering during gameplay. Superhot had what was on paper one of the worst performances with a 0.1% low of just 37. However, I think that is a little bit misleading, as a lot of the frame drops seem to occur during scene transitions, when you're jumping from one side of the room to another inside of the endless gameplay mode. I didn't notice any real stuttering during gameplay, and I think my perception is backed up by the 1% low as high as 70 FPS, so Superhot does get a pass even though the numbers don't look terrific. And finally, the newcomer on the block in Half Life Alyx. I'm not kidding, I had to cut about 95% out of what I said in my gameplay video because I was just gushing about how good looking and feeling this game really is. Half Life Alyx, I think, is going to end up being VR's God of War or Halo. It will sell VR headsets simply because of how good it is. I am a longtime VR enthusiast, going all the way back to the Oculus DK1, and I have often said when asked, my favorite VR experience I've ever had was playing Half-Life 2 on the Oculus DK2 with a Razer Hydro positional controller. Getting the opportunity to walk around City 17 in Half-Life 2 and looking at a AAA game with that level of detail and interactivity in the world was absolutely mind-blowing very early on in the days of VR. The next closest thing that I can compare to it is probably Fallout 4 VR, because they really did engineer the controls in a way that made sense inside of a virtual world. And it's a AAA title with a huge amount of world detail, so it is very immersive. However, it still wasn't perfect. Your traversal made me feel nauseous after a couple hours playing it straight, and there were just a couple of details and game interactions that didn't quite make sense in that world. And to be honest, up until now, there really hasn't been a AAA title that has been designed with VR from the ground up, as in it is a VR title and a VR title alone. And I think that's what separates Half-Life Alyx from pretty much everything else that's on the market. And once you play Half-Life Alyx, it's probably going to spoil a lot of other VR experiences for you. But getting back into the performance of Half-Life Alyx, it still did manage 79 FPS on average on the RTX 2070 Super. And in fact, that was at the Ultra preset. Half-Life actually recommended on the RTX 2070 I drop it down to the high preset, but I wanted to see what was the worst case scenario. Honestly, with high settings, I think this game plays at 90 FPS. The performance at ultra settings was a little bit lower than I would have liked to see, with a 1% low of 41 and a 0.1% low of 36. But honestly, the gameplay never really felt jerky. I did notice a couple of frame drops here and there, but nothing at all that was immersion breaking. So time to wrap this one up. How do I like my all-new Ryzen 7 3700X and RTX 2070 Super VR rig? Honestly, this has been absolutely fantastic. As I said, it's probably just a little bit louder than I would like for a living room gaming PC. I might look at some additional cooling options if available and see what I can possibly do with this. But the form factor of the Era ITX is wonderful. The look absolutely fits what I would want inside of my living room, and you cannot argue with the performance that I got out of this system. If you are interested in any of the parts from this build, or you want to pick yourself up a VR headset to go with it, I will have Amazon affiliate links down in the video description below. Make sure to check those out if you do want to pick up some parts for a new build. On your way down there, make sure to like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you're the kind of person who hoards toilet paper, and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. And follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing to keep up with my daily shenanigans. And finally, a huge shout out to my Patreon backers who help me bring you content like this. If you would like to financially back the channel, please think about joining the Patreon down in the video description below. It gets you some behind the scenes access and lets you chat with myself and the other hosts from Talking Heads. Thank you guys so much for watching this one, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. This one's just weird. Today's beer is the Crazy Ant Gin and Tonic Style Ale from Insight Brewing in Minneapolis, Minnesota, clocking in at 6%. Boy, in this glass, it has a surprisingly muted aroma to it. As in, there's not much of one. Ooh, I like that. As a pretty big fan of gin, This is wonderful. You have to be a fan of gin because there's a lot of layers to this beer. Not quite as botanical or earthy or herbal as you might get with a standard gin and tonic that I'd make at my bar, but it has this really complex flavor profile to it that just keeps changing and keeps evolving in your mouth. Like 30 seconds later, I'm still getting little whiffs of different flavors hitting me. A little bit of cucumber, a little bit of lime maybe. Yeah, interesting. This is such an interesting one because it's complex, but I'm actually having a hard time picking out what the individual flavors are. They keep changing, but they are so outside of what I would call a gin and tonic. Like, I can definitely understand why it's a gin and tonic inspired beer, but this beer really doesn't remind me of a gin and tonic. I'm getting a little bit of lime and a little bit of cucumber. Those are pretty much the only two flavors I can really suss out of this. But there's no gin botanicals in this. There's no, spruce and juniper and those earthy flavors that you normally get in a really good gin. I'm getting more like lemon and wheatgrass almost on the nose now. And like I said, a little bit of cucumber there. It's not a bad beer at all, don't get me wrong. It's just, I'm really not tasting a gin and tonic here. Like, it's really good, and I kind of understand which direction they were going, but I wish I got a little bit more gin out of it. This one's a bit perplexing, because when I started out, I really, really enjoyed this beer. The further I get into it, the warmer it gets, the deeper I get, the less I'm finding things that I like, and the more the flavor's just kind of turning into something not overly pleasant. The aroma's still very, very flat and muted. Like I said, just a little, like I said, best thing I can think of is cucumber on the nose. But, and it's not like it's souring or anything like that. It's just, it just doesn't taste good anymore. It's weird. Like, I don't think the flavor has changed all that much, but I'm certainly enjoying it less and less. So, final thoughts. This is a beer that really tricked me. This is one that really has me questioning my own taste buds, because my first couple of drinks, I really enjoyed this beer. But like I said, it's really hard to pick out individual flavors inside of this beer. Like, I got a couple of things, but when you go in and you're expecting a gin and tonic, and what you get is infinitely sweeter than what a gin and tonic should be, and you're not getting the gin botanicals, and all you're getting is a little bit of like lemon and cucumber, and like I said, like wheatgrass and whatnot. It's just not what I expected, or what I would expect a gin and tonic to taste like. I kind of get what they were trying to do, but I think they went way too sweet and not botanical enough with it. I don't think it's a bad beer, but the warmer it got and the deeper I got into this glass, the less I am enjoying this one. It's really interesting, and I'm glad I got to try it, but I don't know that this is one I would ever have again.